Well, this video was originally going to be released on Reformation Day, and we didn't quite meet that goal. But just pretend that it is Reformation Day, October 31st, the day that God started his work to rescue the church from grave error through his servant Martin Luther. The most important doctrine of the Reformation was justification by faith alone. The idea that we are saved and receive forgiveness of sins by nothing less than trusting in the holy, precious death of our Lord Jesus Christ and his glorious resurrection from the dead. The other holiday today is Halloween, and if you're an OG of this channel, you know that I'm not exactly one of those people who think anything scary is pagan. And I can't think of any piece of media that combines the Reformation's teachings on faith and the holiday of Halloween better than the video game Faith, the Unholy Trinity. Faith is an 8-bit video game published from 2017 to 2022, created by an indie developer named Airdorf. In it, you play as a priest named John Ward in his attempt to rescue a girl named Amy from demonic possession and defeat a powerful demon called the Unspeakable. But beneath the strange and disturbing exterior of the game is a complex story that can help us better understand what it means to live a life of faith. So let's go through the game chapter by chapter, examining the lore and its deeper theological messages. The game, which consists of 3 chapters, starts out with the opening cutscene of Father Ward saying, "It's been 1 year since I went inside that house. I have to finish what I started. What I am about to do has not been approved by the Vatican." This whole game uses these robotic voices that are creepy at first, but once you kind of get used to it, they're kind of fitting for the story. Anyways, this line that John says, "What I'm about to do has not been approved by the Vatican," is pretty iconic, and it's probably what Martin Luther said when he nailed the 95 Theses. You'll also notice that the game is very simplistic with 8-bit visuals reminiscent of the Oregon Trail, and the only ability you have is to walk in 4 directions, and the only weapon you have is a cross, which you can hold up to damage nearby demons that you're facing. This will come in handy right away as you have to make your way through a forest with a 4-legged white creature that comes out of nowhere and chases you down until you show the cross to it. Otherwise, it will kill you in 1 hit and you will be treated to an interesting cutscene. By the way, whenever you die in this game, it says the word. Exploring the area around where the game starts can give us some hints about the game's lore. There's mention of a family called the Martins that live out in this forest. There's a mom, a dad, a daughter named Amy, and her twin brothers Nate and Jason. The dad is off in military training, and the mom is nice, but not the sharpest tool in the shed. Amy recently got a job at a clinic, and it's stated that she's being judged for it. You can probably guess that abortions are being performed at the clinic. We later find out that there aren't actually abortions being performed there, there's actually something worse going on, but the symbolism is clear. There's also mention of the brothers going out to play in the woods and coming back with a horribly mangled deer, just to build the atmosphere of a forest haunted by demons. Eventually, John will enter a shed where he will find a key to the Martins' house, along with a note from another priest saying that there is going to be an exorcism of Amy Martin. If the player manages to make it to Amy's house, they will see Amy peering through one of the windows. Based on John's dialogue in the opening cutscene, and some information from the notes, we can conclude that at some point Amy was possessed by a demon, and 2 priests were called to exorcise it, one of them being John. Something went horribly wrong at that exorcism, and now John is back to finish the job. After exploring the house a little bit, John will come face to face with Amy Martin. A boss fight ensues, with John following Amy around the house and showing the cross to her. Once that part of the fight is over, Amy will flee to the attic. On the way to the attic, we find a note from John that was written a year ago. In it, he details how he was declared to be insane after describing what happened with the first exorcism of Amy Martin, and spent some time in a mental hospital, though he was eventually released under mysterious circumstances. He also describes being very scared of Amy. Once he enters the attic, the next phase of Amy's boss fight occurs. My script says face, F-A-S-E there. That's weird. This fight can be kind of tough if you don't know her attack patterns, but it's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. When the boss fight is completed, John travels back downstairs and finds a gun with one bullet, with the words "kill her" written on the floor in blood. At this point, you have many options about what to do with your gun and its one bullet that all lead to different endings. But the canon one is where John goes back to his car, is attacked by the pale demon from before, and shoots it before it can kill him, causing it to be run over by a truck and die. At this point, Chapter 1 is completed, and John leaves the house saying that he doesn't know whether he did the right thing, but he just has to have faith. Before we move into Chapter 2, let's talk about Chapter 2's prologue, in which you explore an old church and the countryside around it. There's a lot that goes on in this chapter, but to summarize all of the lore revealed in the prologue, there's a demon worshiper in the 1930s who sacrificed a lot of kids to demons out in the cornfield. 20 years after that was resolved, a nun named Miriam Bell was called by the church, and she seemed nice at first. But it turns out she was another demon worshiper who sacrificed 8 kids and left 2 twins to be vessels of the unspeakable, that is, the Antichrist. Miriam is described with the words, "Eye hath not seen her, children fear her," which is a reference to the biblical description of heaven, although it's corrupted to refer to something evil. Chapter 2 proper picks up with us playing as a different priest, this being Father Garcia. Garcia is keeping a boy named Michael in his basement. This Michael is a reference to Michael the Archangel, although again it's a twisted evil version of it, that acts as a guardian to Chapter 1 and 2. The Vatican wants Garcia to release this boy, but he won't. The reason for this is that Michael is possessed by a powerful demon, and there is an exorcism in progress. However, when we go down to check on Michael, we see him start screaming at us and then escape from his restraints. This is likely a reference to a real-life event, by the way. Maybe I'll do a video on that some other time. My denomination of the LCMS was involved with that exorcism, by the way. Michael then eats something and runs away, with Father Garcia leaving him with the words, "You can't hide from God, hee-ho." With this, we have 2 priests with similar motivations. Father John wants to undo some mistake he made in the past with a demon-possessed girl named Amy, and Father Garcia wants to save a demon-possessed boy named Michael. Michael is unfortunately the pale demon that was killed by John in Chapter 1, adding further motivation for Father Garcia to avenge him by helping John save Amy. Back to the game's main story, the main part of Chapter 2 starts with Father John walking through the woods until he reaches the graveyard. Inside the graveyard is the tomb of the Save family, a name that comes up a few times throughout the game in connection with the cult that acts as the game's villains. They're the one who sponsored the cult's hideout that we get to in Chapter 3 later on. Looking into a mirror in the tomb will show Father John's reflection holding up a key. 3 demons will then spawn, with each of them dropping a world-building note when defeated. Additionally, John will find a note saying that not everyone who says Lucifer, Lucifer will inherit his kingdom. It will then give John 3 demonic quests that can be carried out. Summoning a demon in the woods, sacrificing a boy to a demon, and finally killing a young couple as a demon. Though John would never do these things in canon, it is an option that the player has to get a non-canon bad ending. Anyways, after defeating the 3 ghosts in the graveyard, John can get the key out of the graveyard and go to church. Inside the church are a series of notes from ghost hunters who describe trying to summon a demon called the Spindly Lady. While the fate of these ghost hunters is unknown, we can assume that it's nothing good, because the Spindly Lady is a real boss that John has to fight. If he manages to defeat it, he can access the church basement and exit through the back door. Outside the church is a note surrounded by a triangle painted on the floor in blood. The note starts out normal, describing a crime, then starts blaming John Ward for it, as well as blaming him for the death of Amy Martin. The note then starts directly addressing John, saying that he couldn't kill Amy because he couldn't kill the eternal dragon. It then repeats the words, Satane vitae and pandemonium regnat, which means Satan lives and chaos reigns. Then the note shows the numbers 666, which by the way correspond to the Roman Emperor Nero, but that's another video. And those numbers are arranged in the pattern of an upside-down cross while the music builds in the background. Then the music suddenly stops and the phrase, "I'm here, John," is seen in Amy's purple writing. Then John will find himself surrounded by cultists along with Amy before being transformed into a gray demonic creature. As a demon, John runs around a little bit before turning back into a man. He then enters the candy tunnel sewers. Unless you're going for the bad ending, in which case you do some other stuff as a demon. Inside the candy tunnel, you'll find notes about delinquents hanging out in these tunnels and being blamed for various negative events. This is a reference to real-life incidents of the Satanic Panic, a time period where lots of people freaked out about things being demonic. Part of the Satanic Panic was teenagers who did things like smoked and partied a lot being blamed for crimes when they were really innocent. There are more references to the Satanic Panic in this game, so pay attention to those. Once you make your way out of the candy tunnel, you'll find yourself in a dark room lit only by flashlight. The rooms are full with cultists, but they can be scared away with the light. This room also leads to the final boss of Chapter 2, Miriam Bell. Miriam will appear in a cutscene and try to attack John, but then Father Garcia will appear with a cross and scare Miriam away. Father Garcia reminds John that where 2 or 3 are gathered in God's name, there he is with them. Together they go to banish Miriam, with Garcia reassuring John that what happened to Amy in Chapter 1 wasn't his fault. The boss fight against Miriam is pretty long. In it, Father Garcia reads through Psalm 51, the great chapter of God's protection against evil, while John needs to defend him. After the psalm, or rather the paraphrase of it, is complete, he says, "Vade post me Satana, exaudi Domine Patri," which is Latin for "Get behind me, Satan, listen to me, God the Father." He says that 3 times, and then the first phase of the boss fight is complete. The second phase takes place in the dark, and the third phase is more of a traditional boss fight with Miriam moving around in various attacks. Once the fight is done, John wakes up, revealing that all of Chapter 2 is actually a dream. Normally the whole just a dream trope is annoying, but I think it works here because it shows insights into Father John's thoughts and feelings, as well as giving us lore about the game's events. Chapter 3, the longest chapter by far, starts out 3 days before Halloween, aka the Profane Sabbath, with John being instructed by a note from Father Garcia to go to a hospital and investigate some strange reports. Garcia says that the cult will try to use Amy's twin brothers, Nate and Jason, to summon the unspeakable. So John drives his car to the hospital and begins looking around. This is the same hospital where Amy worked. After exploring around a little bit, John finds notes from someone named Gary, who ends every note with the phrase, "Remember, Gary loves you." The phrase is also seen spammed all across the screen whenever the game loads. It seems like this Gary wants to hide something in the hospital, so John keeps exploring, only to be attacked and bound to a hospital bed. He then has to roll around, avoiding a demon that looks around for him. John cannot use his cross to defend himself while bound to the bed. If he manages to escape the demon, he'll be rescued by a police officer. John and the police officer then team up to kill the demon, only for the police officer to be killed by cultists moments after he steps outside. John goes back into the hospital and straps himself on the bed again. He rolls around a little bit and the door to a secret basement opens. Inside the basement is a boss fight against a strange woman. But the woman holds a baby that looks at John with a demonic look. John asks who Gary is, and the woman says, "Gary is a normal human being just like you and me." The boss fight commences, with this probably being the second scariest boss fight in the game. The woman begins to summon babies. The babies will come from the woman and out of the walls and grab John, slowing him down so he can't exorcise the woman as easily. Some of the babies will transform into baby monsters that are really fast and really hard to kill, much like baby zombies in Minecraft. If you manage to beat the boss, you get the true ending for the first part of Chapter 3. Additionally, you'll find a note from Gary who is taunting you. Moving on to the second day of chapter 3, October 30th, John gets some letters from a woman named Lisa who is asking for help with something suspicious going on at her apartment. Upon arrival, John will find that the apartment complex is where a number of Gary's cult members live. He'll find a note from Gary talking to his cult members about how he's trying to take over the world and how rent is still due at the end of the month. He'll also find a note from Lisa saying that she is just fine after all, and she doesn't really need his help, though it sounds very different from her other notes. There's also an elevator that can be used to access any floor of the apartment complex, except for floor 7, which is inaccessible for now. Trying too many times to get to floor 7 will result in a demon called the Elevator Friend spawning. And you can imagine how that goes. There is a seal on a door on floor 5 that can be broken by exercising a ritual knife on floor 2 and a mask in the basement. There's a bit of a long quest to reach the basement, as well as a number of other collectibles in the apartment complex, but the script is 9 pages long. Let's just skip past that to when John enters the sealed room on floor 5. Inside, he'll find Lisa and say, "Lisa, thank God you're all right." Lisa will say that it's so dark, and she can't see the light anymore, but will eventually reveal that she is possessed by a demon, saying, "I'm not Lisa." This is a powerful demon called Alu, summoned by a woman named Tiffany. Tiffany did this without Gary's knowledge or approval, as Gary is trying to summon Malphus. Tiffany is trying to get Gary's attention, but Gary only cares about his vessel, Amy. A boss fight with Alu/Lisa will commence, and Lisa will try to attack John, though she isn't much of a threat. However, during this fight, there's a possibility that Alu will possess John and try to use him to kill Lisa. If this does happen, the demon stays in John for the rest of the game. Lisa stays dead on the ground, and it's impossible to get the true ending for the game. This is a very sad ending. But if John can defeat Alu, then a brief cutscene will play with Lisa thanking him for saving her, and John offering her a place to stay, but being turned down. John will then sense that another seal has been broken somewhere beyond. This is where you need to play the elevator game, where you go to a series of floors in a certain order and avoid a demon that enters the elevator at one point. This is a reference to a real game that people play, by the way. After playing this game, John will be transported into a space beyond the mortal realm. Inside this space is Tiffany, the cult member who tried to gain Gary's favor by doing something never done before. Here we find out that not only did she perform the ritual of the second death willingly, but she did it 70 times 7 times. A Bible reference, by the way, although twisted. What exactly the second death ritual is unknown at this point in the game, but it seems to be the way that the cult summons demons into this world. Tiffany, having performed the ritual 490 times, is now something beyond human. A boss fight begins with Tiffany, and she's the most RNG-filled run-killer boss in the game. But after defeating it, John finds a note from Gary thanking him for taking out Tiffany and questioning whose side he really is on. This pretty much concludes Day 2 of Chapter 3. Before moving on, let's talk about the flashback dreams that are spread throughout Chapter 3. They show what happened the first time Father John and his teacher Father Alrin tried to exorcise Amy. The exorcism was going well until John went to get Amy's parents out of the way. When John returned, Amy was gone, Father Alrin was dead, and on the ground in blood were the words, "Take it, save her." This is where John got his cross from that he uses throughout the video game. John then found that Amy's parents were dead too, and Amy was in the attic. Amy taunted John, saying that John couldn't save his mom, Meredith. John, scared for his life, tried to exorcise Amy. Amy saying, "Go ahead, point your little stick at me." And then John failed and ended up running away. Day 3 of Chapter 3, October 31st, starts out with John getting a note from Father Garcia saying that there are rumors of something suspicious going on in tunnels beneath a local daycare. This is another reference to rumors from the Satanic Panic. In real life, there are no satanic cabals underneath any daycares, but this game is different. Inside the daycare, John will find pictures of demons drawn by little kids, as well as a room with a moon, a cup, a bird, and a star. This is our introduction to the Unholy Trinity: Mother Moon, Daughter Cup, Spirit Bird, and the fallen star that guides them. I think Mother Moon is the one who started all this off by trying to summon a demon at the church in the 30s and 50s. Miriam Bell, the final boss of Chapter 2. Some people think Tiffany is the Daughter Cup, as she is referred to as an empty cup, waiting to be filled with the unspeakable, the Antichrist. But Tiffany only wants to be Gary's vessel. She can't actually gain his approval. I think the real daughter is Amy, the one who is actually used to summon the unspeakable. As for the unholy spirit, I think that is Malphus, the powerful demon summoned by the cult to help with the summoning of the unspeakable. As for the fallen star, that is implied by the title screen to be Gary Miller, the one guiding all the cultists toward his goal of world domination by the unspeakable. Anyway, back to the gameplay. John finds icons of each of these four antagonists on the ground, and exercising them will cause them to change colors. By making them the colors that are in the pictures throughout the daycare, he can open up a secret passageway to the cult's headquarters, Garyland. As you go deeper into Garyland, you will find notes to various levels of cultists. The notes start out welcoming, saying that the cultists are about to find purpose and power in Gary. But as John gets deeper, the notes become more threatening, revealing that the cultists are in fact evil and damned as long as they stay in the cult. Gary says that they are filthy acolytes who can only be saved by him. It's almost as if John himself is being indoctrinated into this cult as he goes deeper into Garyland. Inside Garyland is the third boss fight of Chapter 3, against a giant unholy spirit that chases John around from screen to screen. If it touches him, he'll have a flashback of his time in the insane asylum after the first failed exorcism of Amy Martin. Defeating the unholy spirit breaks the final seal deep within Garyland, opening up a portal to hell, which is where you fight the true final boss of the game. Going deeper into Garyland, John is attacked by Gary himself, who stabs him with some kind of injection. A series of images flash across the screen, most notably one of a church with a yellow and blue figure in it, with Miriam Bell standing in the foreground. This is where we finally learn where John Ward comes from, along with a few other images that imply it. John's mother, Meredith, was killed by a demon, as we already knew. But what we learn here is that Lisa, the woman from the apartment, is actually John's twin sister. John and Lisa were raised in the church from Chapter 2 as orphans. When Miriam Bell killed all the other kids, she left John and Lisa Ward alive to act as vessels for the unspeakable. From his childhood, John was predestined to be a vessel for the demons. This is why John has been losing faith in himself as the game goes on. And now Gary has stabbed John with an injection that's supposed to prepare him as a vessel. It allows him to withstand the presence of the unspeakable without dying. When John wakes up from his flashbacks, he is surrounded by bloodied and half-dead or dead cultists, with the implication being that John temporarily fulfilled his role as a vessel and killed all these people. But John comes to himself and ventures deeper into Garyland. After a series of enemy encounters both underground and in a haunted forest, John will eventually open up a passageway to where Gary is hiding. As John walks through this passageway made up of some kind of writhing, fleshy mass, words flash across the screen saying, "A riddle, priest. How do you open a portal to hell?" Sometimes it waits for the one who has already walked through it. Sometimes it opens itself in the deepest, darkest corner where nobody can find it. And sometimes it comes walking right up to you. As the music builds, John comes face to face with Gary Miller. Before we see what happens between John and Gary, we have our final flashback that explains why John feels so much guilt about what happened to Amy. A year before the game's events, Father John was alone in an attic with Amy Martin, who was possessed by the unspeakable. John begged for help from God, and sure enough, a figure in white light appeared. But this figure didn't seem like God, at least after a while. The figure, referred to as an angel of light, offered to let John go free if he left Amy to the fate that she was doomed to. Scared for his life, John agreed. "Swear it," demanded the Angel of Light, and John did. He exited the house, where he was met by police, stripped of his position of priest, and put in an insane asylum. Back in the present section of the game, John demands, in God's name, to know what the hell is going on here, which is an interesting choice of words. Gary decides to allow John to know a bit of information before they fight. You can only learn about 3 things in one playthrough, but I'll just go through all the lore dropped by Gary here right now. Amy is the vessel for the unspeakable, which we already knew, and so is John, who has been prepared by the injection. Regarding himself, Gary says that he is just a normal human being, just like John, though they both know that this isn't the case. And Gary goes on to explain that he is trying to prepare the way for the Antichrist, along with the demon Malthus. Regarding Nate and Jason, the brothers of Amy who Gary was allegedly using to summon the unspeakable, this is where a big plot twist in the game story takes place. It is revealed that Amy's mom had a miscarriage and Nate and Jason are actually dead. Amy's mom suffers from some kind of schizophrenia and she thinks Nate and Jason are still alive, which is where John is led to believe the same. Because of this, John and Garcia end up chasing twins that don't exist for a good portion of the game. As for the second death ritual, we finally find out what it is. Just a word of warning, this is probably the darkest part of the game. Essentially, using a special ritual knife, a hole is cut in the vessel's face. This is why Amy didn't have a face in Chapter 1. The vessel then puts on a ritual mask in preparation for the ritual. When the actual ritual is transpired, the cultists pass babies through the hole in the vessel's face until they come back out in the form of a demon. This is the actual reason why Gary controls the birthing hospital. This also has some disturbing implications for Tiffany performing the ritual 490 times. But with all of this lore being revealed, it's time for Gary and John to battle. This is the final boss fight of the game if you're going for the first ending of Chapter 3. And it isn't that bad, though apparently in an earlier patch it was very difficult. Gary, similar to Ganon in some Zelda games, attacks with a trident that he throws around and uses it as a sort of anti-cross that slows John down in the way John usually slows demons down. If John takes damage in this fight, he'll drop his cross and he'll have to crawl for it instead of dying instantly, which definitely makes it easier. Also, for what it's worth, in a certain version of the game, instead of saying Rain of Spiders, which is an attack that Gary does where he summons a bunch of spiders, he'll just say Australia. Anyway, at the end of the fight, Gary will try to attack John one more time, before he's suddenly shot in the head. In walks Father Garcia with a shotgun saying, "Don't be afraid, John." With Gary's host dead, the demon that was possessing it returns to hell. At this point, if you did not beat the first 3 bosses of Chapter 3 and open the portal to hell, you will have to seal off the portal to prevent Gary's escape. This will result in the first ending of the game, in which Garcia and John go off to continue the battle some other day since Gary is not fully defeated. Depending on if the player got possessed by a Lu earlier in the chapter, Garcia will either threaten John with his shotgun to help him or will offer to mentor John. But moving on to the true ending in which you defeated the 3 bosses and opened the portal to hell, John is able to jump in and fight Gary again. Inside is a recreation of Amy's house from Chapter 1, though it's completely empty except for notes all over the house that say, "Gary is a normal human being just like you and me. Gary loves you," repeating the same messages that are repeated throughout the rest of the game. We also finally learn where Gary came from. Miriam Bell performed the second death ritual on herself, and out came a baby named Gary Miller who was possessed by a demon. This Gary was put in charge of preparing the way for the Antichrist. Eventually, John will enter a room with the body of Miriam Bell against one wall, and Gary in his true form as the demon Azathoth, the Canaanite god from the Old Testament, will appear. This is the true final boss of the game, and it's pretty hard. Before the boss begins, Gary reveals to us one last piece of information. Gary does not love you. He then begins to attack with 8-bit organ music playing in the background. He does this by either slowly walking toward the player or charging at them. He also does an attack where he dashes across the arena, and he summons seals that block John's movement. Once John does enough damage to Gary, the demon Malthus will appear. Malphus will stand against one side of the arena and shoot out 3 arrows. He will also fly up and try to slam down on John. If you're able to defeat Gary and Malphus, it would seem that you have beat the game. But then Gary and Malphus merge with the body of Miriam, creating an abomination known as Super Miriam. Intense music that sounds like something from Doom begins blasting, and Miriam begins to attack. Miriam shoots out skulls that explode into rings of skulls, flies back and forth across the arena, covers the screen in skulls, creates a ring of fire around John, and more. It's a pretty intense fight, and it even stops you halfway through to ask if you have life insurance. But luckily John is able to take up to 10 hits of damage in this fight. The reason for this is that whenever John takes damage, he prays to God for help. He finally recognizes that God is with him, and being united with the Almighty, his victory is all but guaranteed. If you take 10 hits of damage, however, John will die because faith without works is mortis, though you really have to try to do that. While praying to God, John overcomes the abomination of Super Miriam and defeats the Unholy Trinity with holy fire. Defeated, the Unspeakable appears within its vessel, Amy Martin, and it gets mad at Gary for not being able to complete the ritual. It kills Gary, and with Gary defeated, it's finally time for John to finish what he started. Dripping with blood, he holds his cross and says, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Amen." And Amy is finally free from her demonic affliction. She reassures John that everything is okay, and God has fixed his past mistakes through him. John then exits back up our world and leaves the cultist's hideout, where he meets up with Father Garcia and his sister Lisa. Lisa offers John a life of peace, free from the continuous fight with evil. Father Garcia offers to mentor John and help him finish off the unspeakable. It's up to the player what to do next, and I hear Chapter 4 is coming at some point. And I think the more canon ending to Chapter 3 is where John Ward grabs Father Garcia's hand and says, "Let's go fight some demons." So yeah, that's the game's story and explained in a short summary of about over half an hour. Now, how does this all connect to our theme of faith? For most of the game, it seems like God kind of takes a back seat, but in the final boss fight it becomes clear that God was with us all along. The character of Father John is an interesting one that I think can tell us a lot about ourselves and our relationships with God. Throughout the game, there's this little detail where John's cross changes colors. It's gold in Chapter 1, then silver in Chapter 2, then bronze in Chapter 3. I think this represents John's loss in faith as the game goes on, but not his faith in God, his faith in himself. Throughout the game, John keeps trying to do things on his own. He relied on himself to exorcise Amy and defeat the demons, and he kept failing. He couldn't save Amy, he couldn't find Nate and Jason, and he couldn't save anyone else either. Father John was quite literally predestined by Miriam and Gary to do nothing but help them. Because of this, he could do nothing on his own. To make matters even worse, he made a deal with a figure, who, if he couldn't tell, is Satan himself, and then condemned an innocent girl to a terrible fate to save himself. We, like John, may try to achieve salvation and rescue from the devil by our own merits, but we are inherently corrupted by sin, and it's impossible for us to earn God's favor. We just keep messing up like John did. And it's only when John learned to fully rely on God rather than his own merits that he could actually beat the Unholy Trinity. This is what faith at its core is. It's relying on God to save us rather than trusting in our own merits. It's not just an intellectual idea, the way that you would believe that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Believing in God requires you to have faith that he loves you and rescues you. It's only when we stop trying to earn heaven that we can actually achieve it. By this faith, John overcomes the fear that he once had. The man who was once so scared of a demon that he made a deal with the devil now stands before the Unholy Trinity without any fear, for he knows God is with him. We can be sure and confident of our salvation by faith, so when faith is there, there need not be any fear. The worst that can happen is that we go to heaven. We can stand in the middle of danger and pray and be unafraid. But this faith doesn't automatically mean everything will be easy. In one non-canon ending to Chapter 3 that I have yet to talk about, John refuses to help Father Garcia out and does not visit the daycare and fight the demons. Instead, he goes back home and sleeps. The next day, he wakes up to find cultists surrounding his house victorious, along with a demon inside his house. He unlocks a door that has been unable to be opened for the whole game, and inside is Amy Martin. John falls to his knees and begs for mercy, but no mercy can be given because he did not have faith. As some very tragic music plays, John falls through a hole in the ground and experiences damnatio memoriae, a Roman punishment in which the very memory of one is forgotten. This is because John did not actually have faith in this non-canon ending. He claimed to believe in God, but he did not actually trust in God, otherwise he would have borne fruit. You see, faith is not just intellectual, it requires a complete transformation of oneself. Faith comes at a high cost. You can't just take the easy way out, you have to suffer, like John did, but you endure it all in faith. Faith in God will always produce works. That being said, it was not the works that John did that allowed him to defeat the Unholy Trinity. Sure, he acted as God's instrument to destroy this evil, but he was not the one who defeated it by his works. It was God. And John was only able to defeat the Unholy Trinity by trusting in him. In the same way, it is not the fruit of our faith that saves us, it's Jesus that saves us. Because of this, John has faith even when he can't always see God. God does not make any direct appearances in this game, much like he doesn't make any direct appearances in most of our lives. But we know he is always with us by faith. The music that plays when you load up this game, I think, tells John's story pretty well, and that is the hymn Abide With Me. The first verse talks about how God helps us when we are without any help in this world. When all around us we only see suffering, God is with us. And that's like John's story. He was surrounded by evil on all sides, and he trusted in God and was victorious. The second verse says that all of earth's joys eventually go away, but the one who never goes away is God, and he always stays with us. And that's like John. He lost so much. He lost his wife, he lost his mom, he lost his comfort, his job, but he trusted amidst it all and was victorious by faith. The third verse talks about how God is always with us and helps us to overcome the tempter's power. In this same way, John overcame the power of the demons through God. The fourth verse talks about how we don't have to be afraid of anything because God is with us. We don't even have to be afraid of death because God has conquered it by his son's resurrection. In the same way, John was able to stand before the Unholy Trinity without fear, knowing that whatever happened, even death, God would stay with him. And then the fifth verse says, Hold thou thy cross before my closing eyes, shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Heaven's morning breaks and earth's vain shadows flee. In life and death, O God, abide with me. God stayed with John throughout the course of the game, and his cross was the thing that guided him. Even as the cross grew dim, and John couldn't see it as well, it still guided him, and it guides us through our lives, and it will guide us to heaven, where we will have a fuller relationship with God, and our faith will be turned to sight. And because of this, we live our lives by our faith in him. I doubt anyone's still watching at this point, but if you are, thank you so much, and I hope you got something out of this video. Faith the Unholy Trinity was a game that had a big impact on me, and it did pretty well for a while. It's good that we have some Christian representation in the horror genre, especially since my contribution to that sub-niche was kinda not good. Anyways, once again, thank you, and I hope you have a blessed day. And remember, Gary loves you.